This week on Eye for Iran, Canada has listed the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps as a terrorist entity. What are the next steps, and why now? We'll be speaking with the Deputy Leader of the Conservative Party of Canada, Melissa Lantsman. And elections were held on June 28th in Iran after the country's president died in a helicopter crash. We'll talk to Patrick Clawson of the Washington Institute. I'm Negar Mojtahedi, and this is Eye for Iran, your deep dive into the top Iran stories. Shifting gears now from the election to another big topic, Canada has listed the IRGC as a terrorist entity. Joining us now to talk more about this is Minister Melissa Lantsman. She is the Deputy Leader of Canada's opposition party, the Conservatives. Thank you for joining us, Minister Melissa.
Thanks for having me.
Minister Lantsman, you have stood shoulder to shoulder with Canada's Iranian-Canadian community, with Canada's Jewish community, to enlist the IRGC as a terrorist entity for several years now. And for 6 years, year after year, we have seen motion after motion pass. We saw the downing of Flight 752, where 55 Canadians, dozens of permanent residents, dozens of people with close ties to Canada killed by the IRGC. And then we saw the atrocities of October 7th. Why not then? Why now?
Well, that's the question that certainly we have. 6 years of the IRGC planting its roots here in Canada is much too long, and we've seen it. And it's not just the Jewish community or the Iranian Canadian community. It is Canadians writ large that understand that Iran and the mullahs that are running Iran right into the to the ground are threatening and intimidating our own people here on our own soil, and it's Canadians who have demanded this for far too long. And I have my ideas about why the government decided to wait six years. I think that. The Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, puts himself ahead of national security at every opportunity. I think that's no different on this case. That said, we have a lot of work to do to make sure that this government stays accountable and making sure that that listing means something.
But then why now? Why this moment?
Well, I think, if you want to get into the politics of it, I think there was a by-election that the Prime Minister tried to pad his margins with and ended up losing just last night here in Toronto. And I think there was an immense amount of pressure from the diaspora, from the Iranian Canadian diaspora, certainly from the Jewish community, and many other communities who cherish Western values, democracy, the rule of law, and freedom in our own country from the intimidation and the terrorism that we have seen on our soil with the 700 IRGC agents that we know about that are running around and organizing and raising money in Canada.
I'm glad you brought that up, Minister, because I'm the reporter that actually broke that story when I worked at Global News. So we had more than 700 regime-linked associates and affiliates operating inside this country. And when I worked on that year-long investigation, I also spoke to human rights activist Masih Alinejad, who revealed to me that the FBI told her not to travel to Canada. They advised her not to come to Canada. I mean, this is not like you're going to Fallujah or something, right? This is Canada. And she was told that if she did plan on coming here, if she absolutely had to give the FBI at least 3 months advance notice. What does that indicate to you in terms of the threat level on Canadian soil?
Well, look, I think there needs to be a reassessment of the threat level. We have called on the Minister of Public Safety to ensure that happens, particularly with the hate and the violence that we've seen erupt in our streets, in our biggest cities, in our small towns, and from coast to coast to coast since October 7th, and well before that. Before October 7th, hate crimes went up in this country 162%, and we know that the threat of the IRGC and the threat of terror in this country, we know from the Iranian Canadian community, where the chief of police of Tehran is working out in a Good Life Fitness in Toronto
at a gym, I should say, with women who were not wearing their headscarves.
And that frankly, from a lot of the community that ran away from the very regime that has come here on our soil to threaten their very livelihoods. We cannot have a tolerance for that in Canada. It is why we have pressed on the government, why Pierre Poilievre has called on this time and time again, why members of our caucus have been steadfast in making sure that this Prime Minister takes our national security, the safety of every single Canadian, seriously.
And on that point of the police chief, another thing to note that's really important is he was the police chief in charge when Zahra Kazemi, an Iranian-Canadian photojournalist, was brutally killed in Evin prison.
You know, we hear so many stories from the Iranian Canadian community, and sometimes, sometimes they call from with a blurred out background in their cars, away from their homes, because they are terrified of living in their own communities. Can you imagine living in a country as free as Canada and being scared? To talk to your member of parliament or to talk about elements of the regime that we know are operating on Canadian soil. That can't happen here. And with a new government and Pierre Poilievre as prime minister, it won't happen here.
And I have to say that fear is very real. Like even that 700 number, or just over 700 that we have in the database, that is people who were willing to report that. I mean, this is just what we know, that it's much bigger than that, which leads to my next question. When it comes to actual IRGC officials, how is the Canadian government determining who's who? Like, does the Canadian government have their own database? Are they relying on intelligence reports? How can you determine who is an IRGC agent here?
We'll get more information on the listing and on how they are going to determine that. Certainly, certainly it is with records on immigration, on when you served, where you served, how you served, whether you wanted to serve at all, some of the activities that have taken place in Canada, and certainly from their intelligence reports. And we hope that the next step of all of that is to make sure that there is an accountability for those who are here, and make sure we stop the floodgates of those who are coming here, who want to make Canada their safe haven and their playground for terror. And that means seizing assets and freezing assets, and making sure that these folks can't operate. These terrorists cannot operate openly, raise money, organize, recruit, and we've seen that on Canadian soil. We know that we've seen that on Canadian soil, and it must stop. And finally, after years of conservative pressure, this government actually did the thing, and finally banned these terrorists once and for all.
Does that mean that we don't necessarily have a full picture or scope of who the government is going to go after? And how confident are you then that they can implement this?
Well, we're going to make sure that we hold them to account on implementation on this. I'm frankly not confident. We have a government that is has been charged with reports of foreign interference, where they have looked the other way, where they have looked at intelligence and turned their back on it, where the prime minister has ignored these reports. So it's our job as an opposition right now, until we form the next government, to make sure that they actually do the thing that they said they were going to do.
And how so? How so?
In that process. What's that?
How so? How will you go about doing that?
Well, the same way that we did, the same way that we pressured them, and only after we pressured them, after a number of years and all of that evidence and personal accounts, and the Iranian Canadian community and many other communities who played a role in telling their stories. Government is only as going to be as good as the people that elect them. So it is very much imperative for the Iranian Canadian community to continue to have a voice, to continue to stand up to this government who has ignored this community time and time again. And I'm so pleased to have to be I feel a part of that community. So pleased to have made new friends in longstanding friendships in that community, and to make sure that I am the conduit for their voice, and many in my caucus are the conduit for their voice in Parliament.
And on that note of this database, I reached out to a few IRGC conscripts who were, low-level kind of secretarial jobs. They were conscripts, and I asked them, have you been notified? Has anyone contacted you from the government? And they said, nope, nothing at all. So when I hear that, I go, I'm trying to, I'm thinking, just how organized is the government on this front then? What do you make of that? How do you react?
Well, we've seen the listing process actually take place. That is the first step, and I hope that they get on this very quickly, and we'll be asking those questions, as soon as we come back. And in the interim, we'll give them the benefit of the doubt that they're actually going to act until they don't. But they haven't in so many other cases. This is not the only group that is terrorizing Canadians on Canadian soil, and we want to see action on a government that takes national security, that takes the safety of Canadians, that takes these threats seriously. And if not, Canadians will have an opportunity to replace that government.
I mean, foreign interference, as you said, it's not just the Islamic Republic. We're seeing China, Russia, India, and we've seen Canadian authorities like the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, like the Secret Service, CSIS, saying that, our resources are stretched thin, that they can't handle all of this. What are your thoughts on that?
Our resources may very well be stretched thin, but we have a prime minister who has ignored multiple reports on multiple cases. And when foreign interference was presented to him from his own intelligence agency, he decided to turn a blind eye. And for all of the reports of the MPs who are potentially implicated in this, it is him and him alone that can clear the air to give Canadians the confidence that they need in their institutions and to actually move forward and shine a light on foreign interference. Perhaps provide those resources where they are lacking, but you can't fix a problem if you don't acknowledge that it is a problem, and that's exactly what we've seen from this government.
And one question a lot of people have been asking me is, Negar, is it just being an IRGC agent that will get you deported from this country? So, for example, let's say you were an IRGC member. Do you have to actually commit a crime in this country, for example, money laundering for the regime, etc., in order to be deported? Or is it just the existence of being that in it?
Look, there is no question that there is money laundering that is certainly taking place in parts of the community. You've seen it yourself with the pop-ups of money exchanges where there were never money exchanges before, squandering the riches of activists or frankly of those in Iran and spending that money here. It's blood money. It's blood money. Look, we've got to look at all of I think all of these cases and make sure that when there is wrongdoing, that you are actually prosecuted in this country, or you are actually told that you are not welcome in this country, and that's what we fear is not happening. So. It is our job as the opposition to make sure and continuously remind the government that they have a responsibility under this, and this isn't something that is going to affect the conscript that didn't want to be a part of this, and I think I leave it to our intelligence agencies to know the difference.
And is this going to be done on a case-by-case basis then? Because anecdotally, again, we've been hearing in the community some people saying, "Oh yeah, we've got time. We can move the money around, etc., etc."
Well, it's an interesting question because the government of the day leaked that listing, and that's not usually how something as serious as this takes place, where you would see this printed in the newspaper.
So what are you saying here when you say that? What does that mean?
Well, I say that I don't want to ascribe malice to this because we don't know when the government started acting, when the government potentially spoke to the banks. We'll find all of that out when we ask them the tough questions. But when you give somebody a heads up of a decision, it allows things to move around. It's frankly the government is sloppy on this, just as they've been sloppy on foreign interference, and more than sloppy, but outright dangerous. And we want to make sure that we are being the opposition and standing up for the community that we have been standing up for more than 6 years since calling this, since Parliament actually voted, since the Prime Minister himself voted on this. So we have those same questions as you do. Why now? What next?
So are you saying that it was potentially intentional then on the part of the government to give a heads up?
Well, I see a story in the CBC and I don't hear it from the government. You can say what you want about that, but it certainly seems intentional to put something out in the newspaper before you're putting it out to Parliament and to the process of listing this as a terrorist organization in Canada and banning them effectively.
Could that potentially indicate foreign interference within the government itself?
Well, I don't have the intelligence to suggest that, but it is not usual that you would see something written in the newspapers before you hear it from a minister's mouth. It's usually the other way around. It should be the other way around. Canadians should expect that it's the other way around, and the next government will make sure that it's the other way around.
Yeah, that's been a big question. I know that we've been hearing in the community as well. And another big question is, what about the family members? People are asking me, well, what about the family members of these IRGC? They have been known to, launder money under their name, etc. What's going to happen to them?
If you break the law in Canada, if you are found to break the law in Canada, if you are found to be a bad actor, particularly one that is linked to the now listed terrorist organization, there should be consequences for you in Canada, and there will be consequences for you in Canada. And if not under this government, then certainly under the next one when they are gone.
And what about banks? Because I've been hearing one of the biggest things with the IRGC listing as a terrorist entity is freezing their accounts and their assets, etc. But what kind of oversight is in place? Like, how much are we relying on these financial institutions to come forward and do the right thing? And again, we hear in the community that there are regime-linked officials, IRGC officials, that their kids, associates, sympathizers work in these banks.
Look, there is, this isn't the first listing process of the government. This isn't the first terrorist organization that the government that has listed, and when I say that, that's the government of Canada and successive, parties that have been in government in Canada, and there is a process for that. There is a notification process, and there are, banks that would cooperate as they would in any other situation where money is being laundered illegally, through this country. But I think we need to crack down on making sure that those laws are getting tighter as the crime gets more sophisticated.
And, just to close, Minister Lantsman, a lot of experts I've spoken to said listing the IRGC as a terrorist entity in Canada has a lot of teeth to it. But I have to ask you, can Canada bite?
Well, the question remains on what comes next on the listing, but there is no question that this first step is the right thing to do. 6 years too late, and we've had lots of time for those who have already been here, who have made their roots in Canada, to organize, to raise money, to recruit. But that said, I think other countries will look to Canada, and we'll see what they decide to do. But it is certainly a step in the right direction, a baby step in the right direction from a government that has proven that it has no teeth on these issues. But the first step of that process still nevertheless done.
Thank you so much again, Minister Lantsman, for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
And for more on the elections, we are joined now by Patrick Clawson from the Washington Institute. Thank you so much, Patrick, for joining us.
Happy to do this.
Patrick, let's start with Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei. He's 85. This could potentially be the last election that he personally oversees. What's the significance in that?
He has been very interested in having a new generation which incorporates his values and has been concerned about the corruption by Western values. So that's been his priority, is getting institutions throughout the Islamic Republic in line with his values. The president is not the most important such institution, but it is still a significant one.
And are people then just waiting for him to die, essentially? Are they waiting for this Ali Khamenei to just die?
Well, Khamenei has shut down any discussion of who would be his successor. So it's not a topic that you're allowed to bring up in polite company. And that's very frustrating for people because the supreme leader has been so important. Khamenei is really a hands-on manager, appoints lots and lots of people who have lots of influence throughout many parts of society. Nobody knows what's going to happen when he goes. And no one's allowed to talk about it.
Well, what do you think is going to happen when he goes?
My suspicion is that the Revolutionary Guard Corps will have a lot of influence on who's going to be the next supreme leader.
Well, so are you going to see the militarization then, Patrick, of the Islamic Republic and shifting towards a different stream?
Well, the Islamic Republic has been only vaguely Islamic for quite a long time. So Khamenei doesn't have very impressive clerical credentials, and he feels much more comfortable being with the Revolutionary Guard Corps and the military than he does with clerics.
Why is
So,
that?
well, frankly, he was quite young when he was chosen as the supreme leader, without very much in the way of clerical credentials. And what he did was set out to cultivate ties with the Revolutionary Guard Corps. And it's through those ties that he has really consolidated his power, become such an important figure. He realized early on that it was the Revolutionary Guard Corps and not the clerics who were going to be the center of power in the Islamic Republic.
Wow, so it's for his own survival, is what you're saying.
That's the way he has centralized power in his hands.
And it seems to be working for him, obviously.
Oh, yes, very much. He's very pleased with how things have gone.
And so do you foresee change then after whenever he goes?
Well, there are different strands within the Revolutionary Guard Corps, some of them more revolutionary, and some of them, frankly, more venal, interested in making money. And we don't have a good idea of who's going to come out on top once the old man disappears.
And do you have any predictions on what you think is going to happen then?
Well, unfortunately, what we've seen in the last, especially 5 years, is that there's been a group of really hardcore revolutionaries, the Paydari, who's risen in influence, and they've been pushing hard to see the Islamic Republic become more and more revolutionary. And I'm concerned that they may be the ones who emerge on top. So we'd have a government which is even more dedicated to revolution than the current one.
So, for lack of a better term, things could get, I guess, a lot more worse then, in your view, if that's possible. But
well, ordinary Iranians would really like to see the country open up and join the world, and that's the last thing that the Paydari group wants. So that I think many ordinary Iranians would agree with your assessment that if the Paydari came to power, things would get worse.
And so are you saying that Ali Khamenei is not a hardcore revolutionary despite the image that he puts out there?
Oh, he's pretty revolutionary, but it's interesting to note that he has never allowed anybody close to the Revolutionary Guards to become president. And that's a factor in the current election because one of the candidates, often described as a reformer, is not particularly close to the Revolutionary Guards. And he may actually win. Because Khamenei doesn't want to have any powerful figures competing with him. So he has cut people down to size. He's set up lots of different competing institutions with overlapping responsibilities. He's never allowed anybody to emerge as a number two.
But he's 85. Why does he care at this point? I mean, theoretically, how many more years could he have?
Well, he cares about his legacy. He doesn't have an attitude, well, after me, who cares what happens? No. He cares about his legacy. He wants to ensure that the revolution continues.
And what is his legacy, really?
Well, I think it's pretty dreadful in that what he has done is placed more priority on revolution than on prosperity. And so ordinary Iranians, when they look back at Khamenei's rule, have to say that, gee, a country like Turkey, much less a country like the United Arab Emirates, grew spectacularly economically during those 40 years. Iran didn't. Iran sort of stumbled along, moved ahead a little, but nothing like its neighbors.
So would an Iranian who, let's say, is supportive of this government or of this regime, what would their thoughts then be of his legacy? Would they see it as a failure then?
Oh, no, because in their minds, the most important thing is that he stood up to the United States and the West, and that he's done that successfully, and he hasn't given in, and that his axis of resistance, as he likes to call it, has got a lot of influences in Iraq, in Syria, in Lebanon, and in Yemen, and that shows that Iran has become more of a regional power.
And just speaking generally of the elections this time around, it came about in such a dramatic way with the helicopter crash of Iran's president. What do you make of, or how would you assess engagement this time around?
Surprisingly, the 5 debates, 4 hours each, has been really quite lively. And the candidates have made some pretty telling criticisms of each other and of the current system. So it's been much freer and more open than Iranian politics have been for years. So that's one thing that's kind of surprised people. A lot of people in Iran had tuned out of politics, just not interested in what's going on in the political world. And this election campaign has said, there could be something here.
And, a lot of people will watch or listen to this interview and go, oh, well, there are no free and fair elections in Iran. It's all just a sham. None of this is real anyways. What's the point? What would be your response to that?
90% a sham, 10% makes some difference. So the president's not the most important influential person in the country, but he can tweak things. And this presidential debate has brought out, for instance, that all 6 candidates have said, hey, back off on being nasty to women about wearing the headdress or hijab. And so all 6 of the candidates have said, well, we shouldn't use force against women who don't wear the hijab. We should try to educate them. That's changed the tone a whole lot about how the hijab issue is approached.
And has that been one of the for those who don't know, can you describe, has that been one of the bigger debates amongst the candidates?
Oh, yes. I said they had 5 debates, and one debate was almost entirely about how to treat women and the importance of having a greater role for women and not being so hard and cracking down on women who don't support the Islamic Republic's views.
But some people might say that that's all just talk. They're playing a game, and really at the end of the day, it won't make a difference. How would you respond to that?
Well, it won't make a huge difference. But if women can walk outside without wearing a hijab if they want to, that will be something of a change. And we saw the protest movement 2 years ago in which women were insistent on their right to do this. And the Islamic Republic isn't going to openly say that they're backing off on the hijab rules, but they may, in practice, be looser and less forceful with those rules.
And again, just to wrap up, in terms of the legacy of Ali Khamenei and what could happen potentially after his death, you don't foresee Iran going in that direction that you just described, do you?
No. It would be wonderful if I thought that the Iranian people were going to get what they want after Khamenei dies. But that will be quite a surprise. This Haidari group of people, relatively small, but it's really committed to the principles, the worst principles of the Islamic Revolution.
Are they powerful? Small, but are they powerful?
Oh, yes. Well-connected, rich, controlling lots of institutions, like, for instance, state television and radio.
Thank you so much, Patrick. The Eye for Iran podcast series is created by Iran International, the go-to destination for expert Iranian news in both Farsi and English. For more, head to our dedicated English website, iraninternational.com/en.